I titled this presentation The World Through Their Eyes because throughout this course we've talked about several artists that have used several different ways to portray their art and the rationale for them doing so, as well as the time period that it was in and where they had created the art. Now, these artists are all either Hispanic or Latin American, and they offer a unique perspective because of where they're from, the culture they had experienced, and their family life. I will be taking a closer look at Pablo Picasso, Santiago Calatrava, and Celia Cruz. These three artists were incredibly influential during their time as artists in their respective fields, and yet they all expressed themselves differently for the world to relate to. For example, Picasso was an artist, Calatrava was an architect, and Cruz was a musician. So without further ado, let's start with Picasso. Pablo Picasso was born in Malaga, Spain in 1881. He's one of the founders of the Cubist movement, but we'll get to that later. His family was that of the middle class, but Picasso's father was actually an artist and the curator of a museum, which immediately interested Picasso as a young boy. He actually attended the School of Fine Arts in Barcelona for a short time, where his father actually ended up working. But he ended up moving around to Paris in Spain, where he lived in poverty for quite some time. So after Picasso ended up in Paris, he met a Bohemian artist named Ferdinand Olivar in 1904. Although Oliver and Picasso had a bit of a falling out after their relationship ended up faltering, spoiler alert, yes, they had a relationship. They lived together for around 4 to 6 years. So the relationship ended up faltering. Picasso ended up painting one of his most famous works during this time. So there it is. I'll call it The Young Ladies of Avignon. I don't speak French, and that's what this title is set in, so I'll just say The Young Ladies of Avignon, which is, of course, the translation in English. This work of art was one of his first Cubist pieces, which opened up a whole new style of art that the world had never seen before. Picasso combined both facial features of Spanish people that he was used to seeing in his everyday life, and also uses mask-like features from Africa. So we see the two in the middle, two women in the middle are definitely Hispanic, and then the one on the far left and the far right up top are African masks, and then the bottom right is actually a little bit, as you can see, a distorted face. I read into it, and that is actually another mask. So Picasso used 3 masks and 2 normal faces to just portray this painting. Now, according to Picasso, the radical and racial primitivism in these masks moved him to liberate an utterly original artistic style of compelling, even savage force. So of course Picasso wasn't going for a realistic style in this case, but rather a utterly original artistic style that was compelling and even savage. So Picasso had a worldview that was shaped by all of his life experiences, which was very clear in most of his art. From having an artistic father who worked at a museum, to living in poverty for years both in Spain and in Paris, and to having relations to another artist, it's clear that he saw the world differently than the others around him and was portrayed in this Cubist style. Santiago Calatrava, an architect, also had a unique worldview that truly shaped the buildings he created. He was born in Valencia, Spain in 1951 and was an architecture student at the Polytechnic University in Valencia. And he also received a degree in structural engineering and technical science, and in technical science he actually received a PhD. Calatrava initially started gaining attention after his Alamillo Bridge, which he built from 1987 to 1992. This bridge was a definite marvel, which included a 466-foot pylon, which supports over 24 cables that keep the bridge up. So as you can see here, it kind of looks like a harp, and he did that on purpose. It's both more entertaining to look at and just a style that no one had really considered before. So one idea that made Calatrava different than the other architects was his varied schooling experience, as he was previously knowledgeable in the mediums of concrete and steel. So a lot of architects hadn't quite been exploring concrete and steel to the level that he had, and so that he was very unique in that way. Also, not many architects have a degree past architecture, so the fact he has both a structural engineering and technical science degree tells me that his work was just bound to be a cut above the rest, and above all, just different than everyone else's. He also wanted to explore a form called the zoomorphic form, which is shown here in the turning torso building. This building had a twisting motion to it, a new feat in the architecture world. He also made a building that looked like a bird, which was a huge feat as well. But Calatrava wasn't quite done. He made this addition to the Milwaukee Museum of Art and decided a standstill building just didn't cut it. In fact, he made a movable wing of a bird on top of the building that opens and closes, like you can see in here. It's literally the middle of the building that opens and closes. And actually, that design was taken from Da Vinci. Da Vinci had created a small, pretty small bird that actually had folding bird wigs as well. So because of Calatrava's great knowledge of both engineering and architecture, he had a unique insight that shaped his view of the world as well as his craft, which is architecture. Picasso had his travels and experiences with his parents as well as poverty, and Calatrava had his education. So let's see how Celia Cruz and her experiences were shaping her worldview. Celia Cruz was born in 1925 in Havana, Cuba, and is highly regarded as one of the most influential salsa musicians of all time. In fact, in some circles, she's called the Queen of Salsa. In some of her earlier years, she was part of a group called Las Mulatas de Fuego, where Cruz was asked to sing. Cruz was a previously decently well-known artist, but this group, as we'll see, just really made her take off. She gained a ton of fame and popularity through this group, and eventually started singing on musical programs on the radio, which would later turn into albums for her. And these albums were actually called LP. What we know as an album today maybe has, 10 to 15 or even 20 songs. An LP just has about 6 or 8, maybe even 10. Basically, Celia Cruz just started to write some smaller records, smaller albums after this. Not only was Cruz an amazing singer-songwriter, but she was also an international symbol for Cuba, as she often represented them in her work, in her songs, and just in her life in general. An interesting aspect to Celia Cruz is that she tried super duper hard to stay out of politics, as she just wanted to focus on the positives of her native country and just tried to stay non-controversial. A lot of artists, whether it's musicians, visual artists, poets, whatever they may be, try to either get involved in politics by what they say, what they sing, kind of their instrumentation, and even just some of the themes in their music or their art. But Celia Cruz really tried hard to just stay out of politics, and that's why I think that Cruz saw the world differently. Because she wasn't so focused on the politics, she wanted the world to see both how great Cuba was, and just that, you can always have a positive outlook on life. So Cruz actually did end up leaving Cuba and was unable to return because of the Cuban government. However, this did not stop her from making an impact back home, as well as her new home of Miami in the United States. Now, Cruz ended up having a terrible, terrible battle with cancer, and she was never able to go back to Cuba. But throughout this entire battle, she never talked poorly about Fidel Castro or the political climate of Cuba in general. She stayed very amiable. We just wanted the people to remember the music and just the beautiful parts about Cuba. Now I'm going to play a little bit of Cruz's music, but before I do, this is just a really cool picture of Cruz, I think. She's wearing the Cuban flag, and a lot of people considered her to be an icon for Cuba, as I said earlier. And people actually said she was a shining star of Cuba, and so the star of Cuba is kind of representing how she was the shining star for them. So here's the clip. So as you can see, Celia Cruz was very influential, both in the way that she had a very big stature. She was not afraid to be on stage, and she just really, as you can see here, she truly just loved, look at this smile that she has on her face when she's performing. She really loves what she's doing, and she loves representing her native country of Cuba. So Celia Cruz, Santiago Calatrava, and Pablo Picasso were all different in the way that they produce art. Again, one of them was an artist, the other an architect, and still another a singer. But they were all incredibly similar in the way that they revolutionized the world around them and paved the way for others to follow in their footsteps if they chose to, as they were all sort of innovators in their craft. They saw the world from artists' eyes, and they definitely saw it differently from the people around them, even the people that were doing similar things. They were all determined to leave this planet a little better than it was before them, and in the eyes of millions, they succeeded. So here, if I can get there, is kind of the top left was Pablo Picasso again, the top right is Santiago Calatrava, and on the bottom left is Celia Cruz. All very different people, but like I said, they all made very similar impacts in the world. Here's my bibliography, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.